Hey guys, this is Alex Pierce from lightsailvr.com. In this video, I'm going to be using Assimilate Live FX, and I'm going to show you some of the basics of using their green screen workflow with 360 background plates. We'll talk about how to key your footage, we'll talk about color correction, DeSpill, recording your shot, adjusting camera tracking to match your footage, and I'll even show you how to add fake shadows to your finished shot. Okay, let's get to it. Before we create a project, let's go ahead and set up our video I/O settings. So go over to video I/O, and here you need to make sure that whatever capture card you have, whether it's a deck link or cam link, whatever it is on, and whatever the format is you're shooting in is also selected. And then you select on, and then you go down here and press apply, but go ahead and enter project. And then we're going to click on live setup. So here the default is basic capture. We're going to change this to green screen with background. And then under our foreground camera, we're going to choose our deck link or whatever your capture card is. Under background, we're going to choose the background we want. In this case, I'm using this 11K video. It's 360 video, so I'm going to click open. And then this is very important. You need to make sure that if you're using 360, that this is checked on. So I'm going to go ahead and press create. If you want to be able to record, which I think is a very important part of Live FX, then when you set up your live setup, this needs to actually match the camera that is coming in. So I set my camera to 2160, and these values will default to the incoming signal from your live capture. So this has already set up a lot of things for us. So it is given us two different layers, keyer and background. If we solo the background node here, so you can see the background is this 360 image, and I'll show you this here in a minute. And then we have the keyer. So if you turn off the background, you can see this is our incoming footage here. And then if you click on keyer, you can see that it has a few things changed here. If you look down here, anytime there's something blue like this, that means that something has been changed in these tabs. So if I go into numeric and I change something, and then I move off that, you can see numeric has changed. Primary has changed as well, because this changing the master here does the similar thing over in primary. These are just two different ways of looking at the same information basically. But if I click on this qualifier, you can see our key. And the first thing we'll do is do some color correction before we start messing with our key. And let's go ahead and look at some basic color correction now. So I'm going to turn off my background. And if I click option and drag, I can zoom in. And if I click spacebar and drag with my left click, I can pan around. So I'm just going to drag and zoom in here a little bit. And I want to look at this white part. And I want to just do some basic color correction to make this look a little more white. So I can do this in context with the background or without. I might jump back and forth, but for now I'll just keep it off. So color correction, of course, is a topic all in of itself, and I'm not really the best colorist, but you have a few different tabs here that can help you with your color correction. Balance, primary, numeric, curves, vectors, LUT as well. And then of course there's a lot of other tools you can use, but those are sort of the main ones. Curves and numeric are the ones that I find I spend most of my time in, and this is probably user preference of how you want to see things and do things. But if you go to curves and you select master, this is usually what by default, you can select the curves and you can adjust the curves this way. So you can bring this down if you want. You can do this sort of stuff. If we go into numeric, you have a lot of things here. You can change the S curve just by scrolling around. And you probably have seen this and you probably know this already, but if you, instead of clicking and dragging left to right, you click and then hold down your mouse and then go in a clockwise motion to go to the right and counterclockwise to go to the left. So for instance, if I want to take down the desat, if I want to desat this whole thing, I can just bring saturation here to 0 or to whatever number that's going to be. I probably will desaturate it. And so now let me actually look at this in context of the background. And let me zoom out a little bit. I do want to DeSpill, but I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. So I'm going to make this just a little bit, it'll be helpful to have a human face in here. That would help a lot. But I just want to do some basic tweaks before we get too far. So I'm going to click back on keyer. I'm going to go to curves. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit more. kind of want to take some of the red out. If I go to offset and just take down some of the red, let me go some more extreme. You see it's green. If you hold down shift, you can go in smaller increments. So something like that. We'll leave it like that for now. We're going to come back to that later. So now let's look at our keyer. So with this layer selected, go down to the qualifier, and this is where you can change all of your settings for keyer. And you have a lot of options here actually. First, let's start here at the top left. So you have a lot of different types of keyers. The ones I use the most are HSV, and then luminance for sure, and then vector keyer actually is also another very powerful one. And with all of these, you have the option to pick. So if you click on this pick, if you see that it's highlighted, you can hold down Control. So you can just click on it and it'll sample that 1 pixel. If you hold down Control and click and drag, it'll sample that area of pixels. So you can select all those pixels as you want. You have a lot of options here. But for pretty much green screen, I pretty much always use HSV. So again, I'm going to hold Control, left click, and sample an area. And then these options over here are very helpful. So you can click on Show Matte, you can click on Matte, which gives you the black and white, and then of course you can always choose to look at the source. And then you can, if you unclick the source, you get how it actually looks. Now the matte and the show matte, where you can actually change this to be whatever color you want, I find to be the most helpful, and I use these a lot. So if I'm going to actually leave it right here for now. You can click and drag here to change the brightness values and the color values here. And depending on your shot, you might need to do, obviously you might have to do a lot of different things. So that's these options. You also, under this options tab, you have additional options which are very helpful. I'm going to click on matte to just look at this a little differently. Clip black is one I use a lot actually. So I'm going to actually drag this up. And you can sort of see what that does. You can see it's sort of just getting rid of all that noise. You can also denoise, and you can see this is pre-key. It does denoising. So you can denoise, which can be helpful because sometimes noise can cause issues. And then you have pre-blur as well as post-blur. The results are similar, but it just sort of depends on what you do. I usually add a little post-blur just so that the edges are sort of feathered. And then expand. Of course, you can expand and contract your key. I'm going to hold down Control and left click to reset that to 0. And this looks pretty good. Now, because this is green screen, we can always refine this later. So I don't need to spend too much time tweaking all these settings. I just want to make sure that it looks good enough to get started, and I think it does. So now the other thing we want to do here is DeSpill. So if I zoom in here, you can see that there's green here. You see the green there, and there's also green around here. So if I go to my curves menu again, and I go down here, this is where you can change all your saturation versus hue and all this sort of stuff. So I'm going to actually go hue versus saturation, and I'm just going to take down the greens. So I'm going to take it down to the extreme here. So you can see I can just take the green right out. Actually, I'm going to pause the video because the video is kind of playing with my mind. So obviously you can go too far, and this mannequin is not very helpful. A human face is going to be a lot more helpful when I actually get in there, but I think you still get the idea of what you can do. So you can choose bypass to see the results. So you can see the DeSpill worked amazing just by clicking this one little thing. You can go in here and tweak it even further and all this sort of stuff, but yeah, this is where you do your DeSpill. So I'm going to go ahead and bypass that for now. And for now, I'm going to call that good for the color correction. Okay, now this works fine because there's nothing in my shot. You can see it's all behind green. But if I start to pan, you'll actually see that there's the rest of my studio, and maybe you don't have a cyclorama at your availability. Okay, I'm going to pan the camera so you can see what it looks like when I don't have camera tracking applied. So you can see it looks kind of strange. The person just sort of floats around, and it's actually not very helpful at all. So let's go ahead and apply our tracking. To do tracking, you can go over here to Live FX, and then under the Live Links panel, This opens up this panel here. You have all your different trackers. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the camera tracking part of Live FX, but I have ncam set up. If I press connect, you can see I have my tracking data coming in, and then you need to make sure that you press apply so that it applies it to your camera. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. Okay, now that our tracking is applied, let's talk about the background. So if I click on this background, again, this is a 360 video, and it has a plugin applied to it automatically by the way that we set up this shot. And what this plugin does is it allows you to change where you're looking. So I can pan the camera full 360 degrees. So we can keep going. In fact, I think I want to set this to 180. We'll be over here, and then now we can also tilt up. We can roll, so we can fix the horizon there. And then you normally can change the field of view, but you can see right now it does nothing, and that's because it is linked to shot camera. So if I click on the camera, the focal length of our camera is going to affect how wide or how close the CG camera is, or how the background is. So if I click on camera, if you have focal length coming in from your tracking data, you can actually tie it to this, but I'm going to manually change it. So I'm just going to go pretty wide here. Something like that looks okay. Now let's take a look at what happens when I pan the camera. Okay, that's looking a lot better. The background is actually moving, and that is looking pretty good. So the two things I noticed: one, the background and the foreground were moving at different speeds, and that's something we can fix. And the other thing is that when I pan too far left or right, you actually saw the studio. So first, let's look at fixing the speed. So what we can do to fix the speed is we can go to link. So if you have your camera selected, you can go over here to animation camera, link, and then over here you can choose pan. Again, this only works if you have tracking set up. But right now it's taking the absolute value of the pan data. So whatever ncam is sending, that's what it's plugging in. And if our camera was all set up correctly, 100% correctly, it actually would look fine. But we're sort of changing the way that our field of view is actually working. So we're going to compensate by clicking on absolute and changing this to factor. Now, a factor of 1 is exactly the same. So you can see I have 9.5. If I do a factor of 2, you can see it's twice the value. So I'm going to start with 1.5. That's usually pretty close. This depends heavily on what the focal length of your physical camera is, as well as the focal length of your virtual camera. So it's sort of hit or miss. The way to dial it in is to go and pan your camera and try to get it to match up as best you can. So let's go ahead and pan the camera and see what happens. Okay, so you can see that 1.6 is a little bit closer than the others, and you could of course sit here and dial this in to be much, much better. Depends on how much panning you're going to be doing and all that sort of stuff. So now let's look at how to crop out the surrounding part of our studio. So I'm going to change the camera view so where we can see the actor and the edge of the stage. And now we can click on animate to close the animation. Now I'm going to select my keyer, and I'm going to go to canvas, and then here there's a magic button called relative. If I click this, you can see what happens. So you can see relative and not relative. And this does nothing unless you have your camera tracking set up. So if you're trying to test this without camera tracking, it will do nothing. But if I unclick relative, then I can actually change this by clicking and dragging, and I can move this however I want. And I can tighten this up if I want. Let me zoom out. I can move this in if I want. But now let's pan and see what happens. So now we have a full 360 studio, even though we only have a 90-degree cyc. Okay, I've recreated more or less what we have there, and then I've gone ahead and pressed record and recorded some action. And I'll just show you real quick. If you go to Live FX, if you go to the record panel, you have source capture and you have full shot. So if you record full shot, it records everything into one video. You lose all of your layers. So the best thing is to do source capture, and then I like to have all of these checked on, and they are self-explanatory what they do here. But yeah, so what will happen is you can see right here, when I press record and I stop record, it's going to show up above the live comp. The live comp is always going to stay on the bottom, and the next most recent file will be right above it. So I'll go ahead and press record right now so you can see what it does. Yeah, you should be in play mode when you're recording. And then I stop pressing record, and you can see it shows up here, take 3 and then take 4. So if I click on take 4, this is the actual thing that we just recorded. This is the actual shot. These little ticks are the animation. In this case, it is the camera animation, the ncam camera tracking system information. So you can go through here and you can see your tracking information. So you could actually go back and clean up this information later if you want to. And if you had like a bad frame like this first one right here, you could actually go in and manually choose the settings that should be correct, which is yeah, very cool. And then you have the source footage. So let's jump into this one I already recorded, which has me in my acting debut here. What's interesting now is we can go in and we can continue to tweak whatever we want to tweak. So right now I want to do some color correction and DeSpill, and I'll just show you some basic things here. So I'm going to go to qualifier, I'm going to go back, choose my HSV key here, hold down Control, left click. I'm going to go to curves, hue versus saturation, bring down the greens, might bring down some of the reds too. Numeric, I'm going to add some S-curve, bring down the saturation overall. Make this whole thing darker, and there you go, the most beautiful color correction you've ever seen in your entire life. So the interesting thing here is that we can continue to change the key and the color correction and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do some fake shadows. It's a pretty cool trick. There's different ways to do it. I'm going to actually re-import this clip. So I'm going to right-click, import clip. I'm going to navigate to where it's at. I know it is one of these. I think it's this one. Here's a tip. You can click and drag to scrub through any clip. So I think this is it. I'm going to do open. I'm going to drag it on the bottom, and I'm going to actually apply a different key. You probably could use the same one, but I'm just going to do this for now. And for the value, let's just go all the way desaturation, and then let's turn the master all the way down. And then what we're going to do is go to canvas, and we can rotate this, then we can bring it down. And in fact, let's rotate this way. Let's bring it back up. Push it further back in Z space. Let's see, how do we want to rotate? And then we can scale it. So in this case, I want to scale, in this case, I just want to scale the Y, make it shorter. Then I want to put it behind the actor, yeah. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to use softness to blur it and opacity to dial that in. So I'm going to bring this down to maybe 40, much less 20. And now I have this shadow that I can manipulate. You can see it's not quite right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are wrong with it, but you get the idea. And if I press X, I can hide all my overlays. So if I go back to numeric, I want that master to come all the way down because I don't want to see anything. Back to canvas to make this even less opaque. Maybe go down to 5. Yeah, 5 looks better. So in here, the shadow kind of works. In this part, it doesn't. So what you can do is now you can animate this mask. And I would only do this once you're set on how it's all going to work. But you get the idea. So to animate a mask, what you can do is over here under animation controls, you can press manual and then set key. And now you can see everything turned white. So anything I change here is going to be keyframed from here on out. So if I scroll backwards, I can go to, let's see, okay, it gets way off here. So let me click it here, looks pretty good. I'm going to click set key. And then you can see on the timeline I have this tick mark and this tick mark that represents my keyframes. So if I start back here, let me move this into place. And I'll go ahead and add a keyframe. You can add another keyframe here. Move this over. Set key. Set key. And now you have a pretty decent shadow here. So I think you can see how powerful this might be. In compositing software, this can sometimes take forever and you can't see it in real time, so it's always very frustrating when you're adding shadows and you have to go frame by frame and render it out. And this is playing back an 11K video in the background, and then it's playing my video and it's playing the shadow at the same time. So I could continue to go in here and I could tweak things. I can go back to the camera. I could change the focal length here if I wanted to make it, a little bit wider or a little bit closer. And then if you were going to continue compositing in Nuke or in Fusion or some other program, you could either export these layers individually, you could export the whole comp. You have a lot of options to do a lot of really, really neat things. So I'm going to take our background, I'm going to go over to numeric, I'm going to defocus it just a little bit. Okay, I can continue to tweak this for hours and try to get a better result. I could take the camera raw files that I recorded, bring them back in and replace this file with the camera raw. But I think this is a good stopping point, so let's go ahead and do the outro. Okay, that's gonna wrap up this video. Make sure to subscribe and all that stuff. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.